Alex.
And I'm Shane.
And this is the RPM podcast. Now, we don't normally delay in getting down to the discussion for our post-race podcast, but this episode is the first since the sad passing of Sir Frank Williams, and we just wanted to say our piece on how inspiring and monolithic he was to us as fans. My very first F1 memory is of a Williams being driven by Jacques Villeneuve, winning the World Championship in 1997, and that's just one moment amongst many in the history of the success of the Williams team. 9 Constructors' Championships, 7 Drivers' Championships. The man himself persevered despite his accident and still had so much success. And I really loved the tributes across the grid and around social media and the like, and on the cars this week as well. Every team carried a little memento. And his name will continue to impact this sport through the Williams team itself, who no doubt will go on to have more success in the future as well. Anything that you want to add to that, Shane?
I think you've summarised it perfectly. The only thing I would like to add is the sense of a family Sir Frank created amongst the team. He had such pride in creating every single little part of that car in-house, in his factory. He built that car from the ground up and outsourced as little pieces as he possibly could. Now, there's documentaries on Netflix, on Amazon Prime, showcasing Sir Frank Williams and the Williams family and the Williams time in Formula One. And if you've got a spare couple of hours, do watch it, because it just highlights the passion Sir Frank Williams had for the sport, and more importantly, his family and everyone who worked for him. It was a real honour to be around when this guy was winning and doing what he loved the most.
Yeah, it's like an end of an era, really. I feel like it's a type of team and a type of sort of running of a team that we're not likely to see again for a long time. I don't think it's necessarily gone away forever, but for the foreseeable future, it's a unique period that's kind of come to an end with his passing. But the sport must go on, and go on it does with this week's race. So Shane, let's jump into it now.
So welcome to the Saudi Arabian post-race discussion. It finally happened. Despite all the setbacks and rumours, we actually got to go racing this week. There was a general concern amongst F1 fans on social media that the track might not be up to scratch and might not be finished in time. It was, but that's not to say that they weren't cutting it close. On Friday, there were images going around on Twitter of marshals or workers drilling in the final curves on the track. And also, if you tuned in to Formula 2, which is what I did this week for the first time, and I know that's terrible, we're an F1 podcast, and I tuned into Formula 2 for the first time just to see what the running would be like in their first free practice session. And it was delayed unexpectedly. Was it an operational delay, Alex? Is
that's
what
they said, yeah. Operational delays that were mysterious and never revealed.
So not off to the best start. And of course, we're talking about the Jeddah Corniche Circuit, the fastest street circuit on the calendar. Now, what does define a street circuit? Is it the barriers and the close proximity of the walls? Because actually, no public cars have driven on this track as of yet. As far as I'm aware, they certainly didn't do before this weekend, but who knows? Who knows what a street circuit is defined by? But what we do know is the following statistics. This track has a huge 27 corners. Some of them are basically flat. And if they are flat, are they really considered a corner? Because, man, this track was so flowing. It was amazing to see. And we'll talk about the track characteristics in a bit, I'm sure. 6.1 kilometers, I think you mentioned earlier, or I think you've mentioned to me before the podcast, it's the second longest track on the calendar, 50 laps, and 3 DRS detection zones, which all made this amazing, strange, peculiar championship battle race happen. Oh, I don't know, I'm out of words. I mean, it's been 24 hours. We're recording this on Monday evening, and I'm still blown away by what we had on Sunday. It certainly wasn't the boring race I expected it to be going into the weekend due to the nature of the track and like the single file kind of racing I was expecting. Whoa, that did not happen, and we were really treated. So, Alex, over to you.
Well, let's do like we did last week and talk a little bit about the track itself and our new sort of location for Formula One, because I understand there's like a 10-year contract, and it is for this. Is it for this circuit, or is it just for Saudi Arabia?
I believe it's for this circuit. Unlike Qatar, where we're going to a different location or a different track, we're staying at the Jeddah Corniche Circuit because we're actually going back there only in a few months' time. It seems crazy that we are, because it's round 2 on the 2022 calendar. So we'll be back there before you know it.
Well, yeah, I suppose we got that to look forward to then. Chaotic at the start maybe instead of the end. But yeah, it's an interesting track. You already mentioned second longest on the calendar. They were really pulling out the stops to big up the spectacle, and lots of, all the typical fireworks and the lights that they had around the circuit that sort of changed. And they had a little like light show that went with the music at the end of the race as well. So it was all visually very impressive and had the spectacle that we've kind of come to expect from the sort of Middle Eastern desert races. They always have a certain kind of style to them, and it is very similar to the others in that regard. And it kind of creates an interesting theme. I do rather like it. Something a bit different. And so, yeah, it looked very impressive. I was quite excited about the track itself because it was, at the very least, I felt that qualifying was going to be particularly exciting, because to be on the limit around that track, as fast as it is, with so many of those really fast-flowing corners, it's risky. It is a risky circuit, and that's kind of part of its appeal, I must say. I feel like that's almost a controversial suggestion that motorsport might actually be dangerous, and that drivers might have to be on the limit and be on the edge and do things that are risky in order to get an advantage. I mean, that seems to me like it's exactly the kind of challenge that these modern cars need. You can get a car and throw it around a corner 150 miles an hour. Cool. Do that for 50 laps around this really risky circuit. I kind of like the sound of that. I think that's a challenge that modern drivers might be looking for. And they didn't all say, but it seemed to be a general consensus amongst a lot of the drivers that this was an exciting track, and they liked it. I mean, Bottas was saying that it was very cool and all the rest of it. So, Shane, what were your thoughts on this track before we actually saw any cars come onto it? And do you think that it came out as you expected? You already said that you expected the racing to be not too exciting.
So what I thought the track was going to produce and what it actually produced couldn't be further apart, if I'm being completely honest. And I'll quite happily put my hands up when I'm wrong. We knew this track was going to be fast. The layout of it suggested it was going to be fast. All the simulations suggested that the average speed would be something like 157 miles an hour, which is mind-blowing. And because it's such a fast, windy circuit, I thought the cars will have issues following each other through it, which is a fair assumption because, well, look at the current F1 cars we have. They struggle to follow in dirty air, and this track was all about high-speed corners where the car behind you is probably going to struggle to follow you. However, what we actually had was this bonkers race where there was actually more than one or two overtaking opportunities, and we saw it going into the end of Sector 1. I do apologise, I've not quite remembered all the 27 corners, so I'm just going to refer to sectors for this podcast. Maybe next year I'll learn all the corners. But certainly Sector 1 and going into the first corner, there was multiple overtaking opportunities. We saw it happen in the race between the Ferraris and Ocon, etc., and obviously into Turn 1. And then we had that long back straight where we had a couple of cars pass as well. But yeah, couldn't have been more different than what I expected. It was a real surprise. And I use the word surprise because I'm not quite sure if it was a good race or a bad race or a controversial race. It was just surprising.
Yeah, it's quite hard to tell whether or not it was a good race, like technically speaking. It was certainly an incredible entertainment and quite the event, quite the spectacle. But as a race,
Netflix will love this.
It was just bizarre, wasn't it? It was like Netflix themselves had written it. How can we produce the sort of most silly, ramped up result possible? But yeah, did you have any particular safety concerns about this track and about this race?
Like you said, there's an element of risk when it comes to street circuits. There has been forever in Formula One. We've got Monaco, where there's been some horrific accidents. We've got Baku, where we've had tyre blowouts going down the back straight. We've also got Singapore, where we've had contact going into the first corner at quite some high speed. So street circuits often produce that level of risk. And in one hand, I'm like, it's a risk. No, actually not in one hand. I love a risky circuit because the drivers have to work so much harder for it. Now, the circuit wouldn't have been signed off in my eyes if it was very dangerous and we're looking to hurt people. in my eyes, this is a risky circuit, and we've got the 20 best drivers in the world driving around it as fast as they possibly can to eke out every bit of lap time. And if anyone should be able to do it, it should be these drivers. Now, a lot of people going into this weekend were concerned about track safety and whether there was enough safety mechanisms in place. And especially in Formula One, we saw a couple of drivers go off in Sector 2, I believe. It's where Charles went off. Not Charles. Was it Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari?
Yeah, Leclerc lost the rear.
It
there,
was
I think,
Charles,
at that point.
and then Schumacher came off during the race, almost in the same place. They both lost the rear end and went in almost backwards, but more on their side. And both those drivers walked out, which was absolutely fantastic. But that barrier, that Armco barrier, absorbed that impact and allowed those drivers to leave those cars without the aids of doctors or medical staff. So, yes, it does have risk. And drivers will crash because the nature of the circuit is tight. There's walls everywhere. There's no runoff. There's no room for mistake at all. But this is what Formula One is all about. We don't just go to traditional race circuits like Monza where there's ample of runoff. Sometimes we pop to these real challenging, tight, windy circuits where the drivers have to completely change their racing style perhaps and be less aggressive.
I appreciate that kind of diversity on the calendar.
Absolutely.
Having these different kinds of races. And yeah, like you said, it's not that unusual to other bits of tracks that we have. You mentioned Singapore. I think of that quite fast bit where it like goes across a bridge and it sort of juts right and left, and then there's a very sharp left-hander going around. That's quite a risky part to do fast. Very, very narrow. Some people do try and overtake there. Massa, I think, did it once, had a brilliant overtake there up the inside once. Yeah, that's a track that similarly is very narrow in places, very fast in places. I don't think there's anything about this track that is overtly dangerous, and I think the safety things that they had in place seemed very good to me. And the fact that we had these incidents and all these red flags and safety cars meant that it was a high-risk track, but I don't think that necessarily made it like dangerous, like inappropriately dangerous. Blind corner is not something that we have enough of those at other circuits too. So, yeah, I was looking forward to it because of that risk, like yourself. Now, then we had the actual race itself, and that was wasn't quite the scale electric style race that we thought we might get. And you mentioned it being a street circuit. I think maybe it would be fair to say that it's a street style circuit, because not technically a street circuit because they're not streets. No one's actually driving on them. It's purpose built, right? It's built from the ground up, just next to a city. Absolutely.
And what baffles me is actually some of these corners, especially going down into Sector 1, they're quite narrow parts of this track. And that would make sense if it was a street circuit because you're dealing with pre-existing roads. But this track was built. It has been built in the last 12 months, and yet we've still got really narrow parts of this track. It kind of like bothers me, actually. We've had the opportunity to build this track, and I believe I think it's a good track. I think it's a great track. It's provided some great entertainment, like you said, Alex. But there's still parts of the track which you can only basically fit 3 Formula One cars from wall to wall. So you're not going to be able to overtake because the track doesn't allow you to, because it's been built in such a way where you can't. Found that a little bit strange.
There's the new regulations coming in though, so maybe maybe it's built with that in mind.
You make a very good point.
It's possible. So we need to give it some time. I don't think we can take one race and say absolutely what its qualities are, because especially one as bizarre as this, and the circumstances and the fact that it is the penultimate race of the season and all of that surrounds it, that contributes to our perception of the track as much as anything else. So yeah, let's give it some time and see what it's like. But I think the initial impression is that it is quite an exciting, high-risk street-style circuit. And that's fine by me. I'm happy to have that on the calendar, and I think it was exciting as a result.
And that's not to say that the style of the circuit won't change or they won't make some corrections or alterations, because look at the Singapore Sling. That corner has changed so many times over the last 10, 11, 12 years. It's almost had a different configuration every 2 years we've been there. Abu Dhabi, we're going to next, has been changed for the first time in 10 years, I think. And also Bahrain. We've had multiple configurations of that circuit, but we still go to the same circuit. So things will progress and things will change. It's whether they need to or not, whether they deem they need to.
Is there anything in particular that you would change about it? Because I can't think of anything off the top of my head. But is there any particular corner you might see reprofiled or?
I honestly, I quite like the track. I really, really enjoy it. I've driven it a couple of times on the game and I'm pretty terrible at it, but probably need a lot more practice than what I have done. But it's got the banked curve, it's got the long straights, it's got multiple DRS zones, which gives you that opportunity to close in if you're following those cars ahead of you. Like you said, next year, completely different set of regulations. Maybe cars will be able to follow a lot easier. And with the addition of these DRS zones, so you could be seeing overtakes mid-corner. You don't know what's going to happen next year, but we've got a whole new set of regulations coming, and this track could be one of the best ones. You just don't know. But I don't think I would change anything at the moment. I quite enjoyed it.
So that's the track itself. It's time to talk about the event, the spectacle.
Oh,
struggle
goodness.
to call it the race.
Yeah.
It was sort of half race, half not a race, really, what with the number of safety cars and red flags. And I remember messaging you after about an hour saying, it's been an hour and we've had 16 laps.
Yeah. And 6 of those were underneath a virtual safety car.
Yeah. So
Right.
what do you want to talk about first in this whole thing?
Okay. I think, where do you start? Where do you start in a race which had so many different points? I'm going to talk about red flags. And I want to talk to you. Well, this will be relatively quite quick because I think we've covered this before in Italy, and that might have given it away of what we're just about to talk about. And that's whether you should be allowed to change your tyres under red flag conditions. So obviously we had a safety car. And the majority of the field boxed underneath the safety car because you get almost a free pit stop because you're boxing. The cars are going slower, so you only lose 10 seconds as opposed to the full 25 seconds. So Lewis came in, boxed. Bottas, rightly or wrongly, was driving slower than probably what he should have done and was holding up Max. So
wrongly is the word.
Wrongly,
you're looking for. Just
I'm
wrongly.
sure we'll talk about that. I'm sure we will. There's so much to talk about. So yeah, Lewis came in, changed his tyres, but the Red Bull and Max Verstappen risked it, and they were like, you know what, we want track position. There's going to be another safety car. We'll change our tyres then, which is fair enough because look at the nature of the track. We all thought it was going to be pretty difficult to overtake. So Lewis has got a fresh set of hards on, and Max is still running the mediums. And then we go to red flag, but at this point, Max is leading the race underneath the safety car, and now Max can change from his used set of mediums onto a fresh set of hards if he so wishes, and that's exactly what he did. And got an even better pit stop than Lewis because it was completely free. So what's your thoughts on this whole situation? Where do you go with it?
Yeah, I have to say that I agree with Lando Norris, who said that it was very unfair that people can change their tyres. I think that replacing damaged parts that are the same spec is one thing, but changing tyres it's too much of a freebie. You've had this delay between the safety car and the red flag. And I don't think that is necessarily an issue because they saw that a car went off in a risky place and they wanted to have the safety car to ensure that, that was the right call to make sure that there wasn't another incident with a car being in that position. But then they need time to assess any potential damage to that Tech Pro barrier. What happened is it had a puncture in the barrier and they had to lift it out and replace it. And that's why they had to have the red flag. So it maybe took them some time to assess that and say, actually, we need to replace this, so let's red flag it. So some people have taken the gamble during that period, not knowing, red flag or no, what's exactly is going to happen. Some of them have taken the gamble to go for the pit, including obviously both Mercedes drivers, for example, who had that double stack. But then all of the potential strategy that goes into that evaporates and actually turns against them for taking that risk just because people are arbitrarily able to change their tyres under a red flag. It seems to me that if the session has stopped and tyre changing is normally something that happens during the race,
A live session.
then the session has ended. So you should not be able to do something that you would otherwise should be doing during the race itself. Whereas replacing those damaged parts, even that you could say, well, you damaged it during the race and the race is not happening right now. So if you want to repair it, then you say you damaged your front wing. It's like, well, you got to wait for the race to start again before you can change that. I don't know. Maybe that's a bit too harsh, but I think a happy medium can be struck between allowing some damaged parts to be replaced and saying, but you have to keep the same tyres. I think that seems much more fair when people have taken the risk during the safety car and then, sorry, it doesn't matter. Actually, it's a huge disadvantage for you to do that because your opponent can now get fresh tyres. How much impact that actually ended up having in this specific scenario is a bit doubtful, because I think Hamilton maybe had like 2 or 3 lap older tyres under a safety car. So it's not like he was burning them down. But I think that we should consider the wider implications of these kind of decisions. And it has had a big impact before. So I do think it's time to maybe nip this particular one in the bud, because it does seem a bit unfair.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I'm glad that you went with that stance, because it's something I feel strongly about as well. And it's not just because, it benefited. I feel strongly that it shouldn't happen. And that's not because Lewis lost out. Because if you go back to Imola, where we had a red flag, and Lewis managed to change his front wing and his tyres and maintain that race, so it clearly benefited Lewis then. So just making sure we strike the balance here. For anyone who's listening and is a Max and Lewis fan, this rule has definitely benefited both drivers throughout this year. But I think it's a rule which needs to go. I do. I think, like you said, changing your tyres is a strategic move during a live session, whether that be practice or qualifying or the race. You come in, the clock is still ticking. You are losing time, whether it's qualifying or the race. I don't believe in this whole, okay, the session stopped. That's it. Everything on your car should be as is. That is it. Unless, you might, like you said, there should be a finite amount of stuff you can change. I don't think tyres is one of them, unless you can prove you've got a puncture or something, and it would be unsafe to drive out the pit lane with that tyre.
Yeah, anything that might cause a safety concern or might mean that the driver is not able to control their car properly, like they're missing a front wing or it's heavily damaged or something.
Yeah.
That I can understand, but a strategic advantage gained from simply, we'll just replace our tyres, that'll give us a bit extra.
Yeah.
It's too much of a freebie. It's way too much of a freebie when the session is supposed to have stopped.
Yep.
It's too much of an advantage to be gained. So that was our red flags, and we had 2 red flags, of course.
Yes, we did.
We also had all standing starts after these red flags. I was glad that they did that. I'm not a fan of rolling starts when you have a red flag like this. I think it should be a standing start, and that's exactly what we got. Anything else that you want to add for the red flag situation?
Should we dial it back ever so slightly to Bottas slowing down underneath the safety car, but just before the red flag? Do you want to talk about that? Because I feel like you felt a little bit strongly about that, and I want to give you the opportunity to let everyone know what you're thinking.
Well, he's not supposed to do that. That would be considered driving unnecessarily slowly. I don't know exactly if they have to meet some particular delta and whether he slowed down at that particular bit and then sped up in order to match it again. But any sort of driving unnecessarily slowly or that sort of thing, it would be covered under that kind of action. Everyone on the broadcast seemed pretty unanimous that it wasn't the right thing to do. Jean-Pierre Lambiase, Verstappen's engineer, was furious. We don't normally hear him being that angry, but he was furious, and he knew that that's exactly what they were doing, so that they could double stack like that. I do think it was more than just a little bit cheeky. Like, you are not supposed to slow down like that in order to gain that kind of advantage. And it wasn't even noted by the stewards. It wasn't, never mind investigated, it wasn't even noted. And it must have been reported. It must have been. So for nothing to come out of that is weird. It's just added to the collective weirdness. I don't really want to throw too many accusations at the stewards and the FIA, really, because who'd have their job on a day like that?
I certainly wouldn't.
Honestly, who'd really want to be having that position? It must be an absolute nightmare. I commend Michael Massey for being able to remain even slightly calm under those circumstances. You could tell in his voice and quite a few times he was pretty stressed and under a lot of pressure, but he managed to keep it together better than the vast majority of people, I think. So fair dues. But it is a part of the collective strangeness that something like that could happen and must have been reported, and just for it not even to even hit their radar at all, it appeared. That was what it looked like from our perspective. Just doesn't seem right. Surely that's got to be against the rules. So I do think Bottas did something wrong there and was very lucky not to get a penalty, because as the rules as written, I think he should have been penalised.
Yeah, and I agree, because there's one thing, it looked like Bottas slowed down a lot more than what was required to do a double pit stop, because actually we didn't Usually,
There's a
if
big gap, really
there was
big
a huge gap. And usually, if Mercedes go to execute a double pit stop, there's a camera person standing right there, and we get to see some magic happen because they've done double pit stops before, they've executed them well, and usually you need a 3 or 4 second gap to execute that double pit stop well. But Bottas had such a huge gap between him and Lewis. It was around the 10-second mark, and I couldn't for the life of me understand why they needed such a gap to
That's why
execute
it's
that
a
double stop.
literal definition of unnecessarily slowly.
Yes, yeah, because I just don't understand. Like you said, it wasn't noted either. It just completely went just over the stewards' heads or over the FIA's heads. It just wasn't noted at all. And I think that was, if anything's going to be slam dunk this weekend, it is driving unnecessarily slow behind the safety car to give your teammate a huge advantage and hold up the championship rival behind you. That should have been a penalty. It should have been a 5-second penalty for doing that, or it should have been a 10-second penalty to do that, because it did impact the race. Obviously, it went on to be a red flag, and everything kind of sorted itself out. And Bottas was in P5, I think, afterwards. Anyway, so maybe Red Bull didn't push it because there were far greater concerns happening at the time with regards to strategy and other things. But very lucky Bottas to get away with that, because I honestly thought that was going to be a slam dunk.
Right, let's move on to the next big talking point, if you don't mind, because I've got one that I want to get going on here. We've talked it.
I have no idea which one you're going to talk about. That's what I love about this race. I have no idea. You talk about a big talking point, and it could be anything.
Well, we've talked a little bit about Mercedes. Now I want to talk about Max Verstappen.
Okay.
Because I think that at this race we saw the absolute best and the absolute worst of Max Verstappen. It really was just Verstappen in a nutshell in many ways in this race. Let's start with qualifying, where he was putting in an incredible final lap. Ruined, of course, by him hitting the wall at the final corner of all places. But it was genuinely amazing watching him do that flyer up to that point. It was real commitment. He was right up against the walls. It was a pleasure to watch, a thrilling final lap, and he was really going for it, and he would have been a fair point ahead if he'd actually made it. But you've got to make it stick, mate. Sorry, it just doesn't, it doesn't count. You got to actually get it to the end. But that was the first taste of some magic, Supermax, etc. Now, not too much to say about the laps before the first safety car, because he was solid. He was slowly reeling in Bottas. The move for the lead after the first restart, though, it's just absolute nonsense. Like, Hamilton gets a much better start, and other than the first stage of the actual launch, Hamilton is ahead the entire time and has every right to the racing line going into turn 1. And Verstappen just tries to hang it around the outside anyway, and the only thing Hamilton could have done to give him space is much what I said he could have only done in Monza, which is to just leave the racing line and go wider into the next corner and basically give it up, basically giving up the corner. Hamilton had every right to the racing line there, was ahead the entire time. And Michael Massey then had this sort of thing where he was offering them, this is what I'm going to offer you. Because he has the power to do that, of course. He can act as this sort of intermediary before it goes to the stewards. Because that's what he was saying. He was saying, you can do this, or I'm going to pass it on to the stewards. And who knows what they're going to do? Like, literally nobody knows.
Deal or no deal.
It is exactly like sort of Schrodinger's stewards. You just know it, that everything could happen at any given time until they actually say what's going on. So that was what was going on there. He was offering it to them before more madness. It was going to be Ocon, Hamilton, Verstappen. The lack of complaints from Red Bull suggested that they kind of knew that he wasn't going to keep that place, because it was pretty obvious that it was absolute nonsense. On lap 37, Hamilton made a very similar move to go around the outside, but backed out as the gap closed, because Verstappen just wasn't going to yield, and he was entitled to the racing line, so that was fair enough from Verstappen. He didn't have to yield there at all, but the difference was that Hamilton backed out and then went around the corner as he should have done. He didn't go blasting across the runoff, which he could have done, but he didn't do. Quite telling, I think. Quite telling of different styles. Now, but having said that, because I mentioned we'd seen the worst and the best, when he went from P3 to P1, in one turn at the second restart, that's like stuff of legends. That's the Max Verstappen that I love to see. He timed it beautifully. There was no contact. It was a fantastic, opportunistic move up the inside where Hamilton had to cover off Ocon, and Ocon was going for it. Ocon was really like throwing himself in there. It was worth a shot, and Max Verstappen took full advantage, and it was brilliant. It was a brilliant move. That's the legendary stuff I want to see. Then there's the collision, and we'll talk about that more separately. I think because that's a whole other
ballpark.
But then. I think I got to say, just to add a little bit on the whole best and worst thing, again, I think that's part of some of the worst of Verstappen as well. I'll talk more about that later. Then we have lap 42. He appears to let Hamilton by, but then immediately repasses him again. He's been asked to give the position back and hasn't done for some time up to that point. Now, contact or no contact on lap 38, that's still the directive he's been given, and it's not been retracted as far as we know, so he still has to give the position up. There's a lot of confusion as to what is actually going on, including amongst everyone who's watching it. In my notes, I think one of my notes is just lap 41, what is even happening? Is he supposed to give it back or what? I'm going to skip over that bit so that we can talk about, because I've got a bit about the collision, but we'll talk about that later. So yeah, he then just goes straight past again after that point. And I don't know if that's exactly what the rules say, but it doesn't seem very sporting to me when it comes to the idea of returning a position. The only other incident I can think of is Hamilton overtaking Raikkonen by cutting the chicane at the 2008 Belgian Grand Prix. And he did a very similar thing where he let Raikkonen go past and then just retook the position shortly after. Hamilton, by the way, got a 25-second penalty for cutting the corner and gaining an advantage then. So that shows you that the stewards have actually got a lot more lenient over time. He got a 25-second penalty for that.
Damn.
And Verstappen got a 5-second penalty for doing that. So I think that's quite telling as well. It used to be a lot harsher. So on the one hand, you have this Max Verstappen with incredible speed, incredible moves to take positions, but just is occasionally just too aggressive. It just dials the gamesmanship up so high to Michael Schumacher style levels that it just makes you think a bit like, can you just not do that? Can you just not pull that kind of stuff sometimes? It's very, very frustrating because he is such a brilliant driver. And I think Niki Lauda said it best in that he talked about how, Niki Lauda said that Verstappen was this sort of truly generational talent, was amazing, but just spoilt it by being overly aggressive, and that he need to learn how to dial that down, how to have that as controlled aggression sometimes. And it still seems to be the case with Verstappen. And I say this after having said before that I thought that he'd really matured, and in some ways he has, and in other ways he kind of hasn't. So what do you make of all of that, Shane? Do you think Max Verstappen comes out of this looking any different, any better, any worse?
I think it's fair to say that the pressure of the championship battle is getting to Max Verstappen. He can stand in front of a media pen and turn around and say it doesn't bother him. He's treating it like any other race because his driving style over the last 5 races is completely different to the first 5 races of the year, or last year where actually he was maturing. We both made comments how Max is actually maturing as a driver and how he's making these clean, safe, bold overtakes, on the line overtakes, but clean and safe and respected the other driver as well. And now we're getting into the realms where actually, like you mentioned, into turn 1, where Lewis was going for the overtake and Max just forced him wide. And Max just cut straight across that corner and Lewis rejoined like almost where he went off. And I thought that's a difference between drivers in completely different stages of their career, because Max is this young blood who's thirsty, who really wants his first world championship, and you could almost say we'll do anything to secure it. And Lewis is obviously has been driving for a long time in Formula One. And I'm not saying he was an angel when he first joined at all, because drivers mature across their whole career, but he's certainly the more mature driver now. And you can see the difference in driving style on track. You really can. That where Lewis backs out of a closing gap, Max won't, and he'll just cut the corner. Max isn't afraid to close the door. We've seen it in Brazil, going into the second sector where he forced Lewis off. We all thought that was a bit touch and go. And this week we've seen We've seen it again. I don't like it. I don't like it because we're seeing more of the aggressive Max who's not respecting the track and not respecting other drivers compared to the brilliance. And yes, you are right. We saw some absolute brilliance from Max Verstappen today. Well, this whole weekend, the pace in qualifying was something to be proud of. If he had just kept it around the final corner, he would have got 3, maybe 4 tenths on the Mercedes. It was crazy the amount of pace. And that would have been a massive one up to Red Bull going into the race. But no, he just got on the throttle a little bit early, and I think that's just a mistake. But what isn't a mistake is strategically pushing off your competitor or closing the door or rejoining in a manner which I don't think was safe, where he joined the track at a 90-degree angle. He came like 180 degrees onto the track, went sideways on, and then full lock to the right. Whereas when Lewis or any other driver went off, they join with the track, coming on to the side of it was a big difference, and it was really noticeable this race. And I really, as much as I love this drama and I love this championship battle and how the gods have aligned that we're going into this final race on the same points, it's absolutely mind-blowing. But I am a little concerned about this final race. I am concerned about Dubai, and actually Max is still leading the championship. He's still leading on race wins. Like, he's got everything to lose, whereas Hamilton's got everything to gain. So one's being aggressive in defending and one's being aggressive in attacking. I am a little bit worried that actually, if Max and Lewis came together and took each other out, and it wouldn't be the first time this year, Max would win. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying anything, but that is the reality of the situation. And we've seen some very aggressive moves from both drivers, but some more clean than others. And we've got one race to go, and both drivers are, Lewis's title. If he gets this 8th title, he will be the most successful Formula One driver of all time. Undisputed. He's already got the most wins and the most poles and the most podiums. But if he collects an 8th Drivers' World Championship, he's topped the lot. And Max, he wants his first. He wants to be the one who takes it away from Lewis Hamilton. And up until this weekend, we've had this brilliant title fight. Yes, we've had some controversy on track before, but it's all kind of been in the spirit of racing and honest mistakes, I do believe. But I just feel like this weekend it was just a little bit too far, and we haven't even spoken about the incident where they touched. So it's a real hard one, and we get a lot of comments about sitting on the fence, but this is the one I'm definitely saying that I feel like Max was more aggressive than he should have been and more at fault for the majority of the contact or the majority of the incidents in that race. But that's not to say that he isn't a fantastic driver, because he knows exactly what he's doing, and that's what makes him aggressive but fantastic.
Yeah, it does feel that it's gone that extra step, and I don't think it's a surprise, because we all sense that it might happen near the end, especially if things were tight, which they are. It's not, if it does happen next week and sort of they crash out and it happens that way, I think that it'll be pandemonium on social media, and but it won't be the first time.
Need a new headset.
Yeah, going to need a whole new garage. I think it will destroy the entire. He might explode.
I think he might.
But there's it's not the first time that it will have happened. A championship will have been decided that way, and it can happen. And also, if the stewards are going to follow this sort of just let them race kind of attitude, then that's what you can expect is going to happen. People are just going to keep pushing that little bit further. They're going to keep prodding that little bit more to see if they can get a little bit extra out of it, gain a little bit more of an advantage and get away with it. So this is just the natural conclusion to what we've seen happening so far. It's just been winding up. Compare Verstappen giving the position back in Bahrain, which he had to do after passing off track, which was pretty straightforward and was obvious, and he was all the way over to the right and it was nice and easy. And then this race, he didn't exactly make it very easy. So it's a strange old thing. But that for me, this whole race was, as a character of the driver, was very much about Max Verstappen rather than Hamilton, because it was Verstappen who was in a position to claw it back and take that win. And I don't think he really showered himself in glory in the process. And as a result, we saw the best and worst of the man. All right, what do you want to go on to next?
I want to talk about Sebastian Vettel and the damage to his car and how that contributed to another, I think it was another virtual safety car, was it? Or was it a full safety car?
I think it was just a VSC for Vettel's one.
So I'm sorry, I'm relying on you a little bit more than I should do for this part of the podcast. Can you remember who made contact with Vettel originally? Was it Kimi Räikkönen or Yuki Tsunoda?
It was Tsunoda that hit Vettel.
It was Tsunoda, and he tore up a lot of the side pod, the right side pod of Sebastian Vettel's car. We got great shots of it going around the street-styled circuit, and bits pinging off and flying about. And initially, I thought, "Oh, that's quite a lot of damage, and it's already dropped a fair bit of debris on the floor." Vettel's probably done a tire because there's bits of carbon fiber falling off his car. But we went onto a VSC and Vettel stayed out, didn't box because his wing was fine. And actually, unless your front wing's broken, there's really no need to box unless you're retiring the car. But actually, as the laps went on, we ended up getting a second VSC because more parts of Vettel's car came off and they were situated on pretty crucial parts of the racing line or just off the racing line. But again, this is a very fast-flowing track with blind corners. You're not going to hit the same bit of tarmac every single time. And I thought to myself, was that a little bit unsafe? Should Aston Martin have called in Vettel a lot earlier? Because he did end up retiring, obviously. But should they have made that call a lot earlier? Because actually, he caused a virtual safety car twice. There was a lot of debris. We're putting marshals at risk. I know we're not technically putting marshals at risk because in an ideal world, they're only entering the track when it's safe to do so. But we've seen incidents in the past 2 years, where that's not always been the case. But by him driving round continuously for another 4 or 5 laps, bits of car falling off just seemed wildly unnecessary. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's a few laps between when all that is going on. Yeah, like you say, there was a second safety car, and I think it was Alonso that was on the radio saying there really needs to be a VSC because there's a lot of debris. And I'm surprised that they didn't get a message saying, there's too much stuff coming off your car. You need to box and either remove it or tape it up or something. Because normally when something like that happens, the stewards get onto you and say, because there's a flag for it as well. It's it's the black flag with the orange circle, isn't it? Like there's something dangerous on your car and you have to pit basically. So I'm surprised that they didn't get that earlier. I don't really blame the team as much in that regard because they have a certain responsibility, but really the stewards should be looking at that and deciding whether or not it's safe. And it took quite a while, seeing how much debris there was, for there to actually be the VSC in the first place.
Yeah.
And then it was clear that there needed to be another one so that they could clear more debris off as well. And this is just part of the difficulty of having these kind of circuits when they're all enclosed like this, and the marshal stations are at specific bits where people can get in and out of the circuit. Cool, I wouldn't like to be doing that. That'd be pretty nerve-wracking, wouldn't it? You've got to jump on the circuit and run out and grab a piece of, this bit of sort of shrapnel or whatever and then run back on. So that's an unenviable task. So I don't know. I don't really blame Vettel and the team as much as I think the stewards should have been on it, really. They could see that situation and see all the debris there was, and they should have wrapped that whole thing up a little bit neater in general. Mind you, that's true of the whole event, really.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, you could apply that to a lot of things on track when it comes to executing things a little bit more efficiently. But that's fair enough. I just wanted to hear your opinion. It was a slightly off-topic talking point for this podcast, given it wasn't the biggest drama of the day, but I thought would bring in some other drivers just to give that element of balance for the podcast.
Let's we might as well dive into the other big incident then, seeing as we've already touched on Verstappen in general, and this is the big contact on lap 38, where Verstappen has received the news that he has to give the position back to Hamilton, and this is because of because of him sort of gaining an advantage, taking the position, as it were, because it's lap 38 that is the contact. And this is because of what happens lap 37, where Hamilton tries to get past Verstappen, and he's sort of stonewalled into turn 1, and because Verstappen goes off the track. So I assume it's because of that, basically.
Yeah, because Verstappen, I think Lewis had Verstappen into turn 1, or certainly alongside him, or more. But then Verstappen exited turn 1, or turn 2 technically, I'm not sure how it works, with a greater advantage than he did going into it. So he'd left the track and gained a significant advantage. And obviously Lewis rejoined, further back than what Max did.
Yeah, he like took the lead and then had to give it back. I'm just looking through my notes to try and get the exact construction of events. But anyway, he had been told that he had to give the position back to Hamilton. And it seemed that as we pieced it together after the event, it appears that they told Red Bull, who told Verstappen, and then there was some kind of delay, or they were telling Mercedes right at the very moment that this sort of collision took place, it sounded like. So there was some confusion going on. But Verstappen, first and foremost, slows down, but it's not exactly, I wouldn't say he'd moved over to the side of the track. He was still pretty much in the middle of the track. And there is absolutely enough room for Hamilton to go past. But he doesn't. And there seems to be a moment of confusion where a combination of them both potentially gaming this DRS detection point and also maybe Hamilton has got a little bit nervy fighting against Verstappen because he maybe gets a sense that he's not sure what he's going to do and what kind of moves he might make to protect his position. It's possible that you could argue that he saw Verstappen going slowly and he should have just gone straight past him. What if he had an engine issue or whatever? But I don't know, it's very difficult to get inside the heads of these drivers when they're the ones actually racing one another and what they must think about the circumstances, how much time they really get to think about such a circumstance. So the confusion seemed to reign over this particular lead up to that particular collision. And also, I think that after the race, both of them, mainly sort of from Max's point of view, was all sort of, well, I'm just doing my thing. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's happening. It's like, well, you're intelligent, experienced racing drivers. Like you must have had some sense of the context of what was going on there. And the big question that comes out of this whole thing, above anything else, is why does Verstappen hit the brakes when there's a car right behind him? I mean, he must know this. He must know that Hamilton is right behind him. So why does he need to hit the brakes there? He's already slowed down. Both of them have. But then he applies enough brakes to cause 2.4 Gs of deceleration, according to the information the stewards had.
Yep.
That's pretty significant. I don't think you could pull that many Gs in deceleration in your average road car without losing control. So that's a pretty significant deceleration. So I'm just left thinking, why do this? Why do you need to do that? He could have, if he wanted to make it plain that he was letting Hamilton through, move more over to the right. But he doesn't do that. He presses the brake. So it's a weird old scenario that builds up to it with confusion. But then the penalty goes to Max because why would you do this?
Yeah.
Why would you press the brake? What's your sort of take on this collision?
It's so strange, and it was unbelievable watching this live because I don't think anyone had any clue. Because at the point of this being live, no one had any idea that Max had been asked to move over. This was all happening on our screen with no team radio whatsoever. Now I think there's two parts to this. We can have a look at the FIA and how it was communicated, and we can have a look at the drivers. Now I want to talk about the FIA. I think they made one mistake. And that was telling the lead car first that he had to give that position back and not telling the chase car. I can't think of any reason as to why you would tell the lead car first, because then the lead car is going to react, causing a chain reaction to the car behind. If they had called up Mercedes and says, right, James, I don't know who the chief technical engineer or whoever talks to the FIA from Mercedes. If they say, right, we're going to tell Red Bull to switch to the positions. So let Lewis know that he can expect Max to slow down at some point and you will switch to positions. We will get onto Red Bull now. Brilliant. Lewis is prepared. He's ready. He's just chasing Max. He's waiting for the switch. Why in the world they decided to let Max know or let Red Bull know first? Max was always going to execute that maneuver in Sector 3 because that's the best place to then re-overtake into Turn 1. That's strategic. That is strategic racing. Whether I think that's fair or not, I don't know. I'm sure we'll brush on that in a second. But obviously they let Max know first, and Max slowed down, and it kind of caused all kinds of confusion for Lewis. Now, initially when I saw both of them slow down, I thought, I wonder if Lewis is like a little bit apprehensive, not necessarily because of Max, but Lewis has seen a car which he's been racing at full speed for the last God knows how many laps, slow down to a quarter of the speed they were racing? Is there something ahead he can't see? Is there a yellow flag? Is there something on his dash he's missing? Is it gone down to virtual safety car? Is there a full safety car and Lewis has missed it? Initially, that's why I thought Lewis slowed down, because he was so taken back that Max had just slowed down in the middle of the track. So it wasn't like he was willing to give up that space or making it abundantly obvious that that space was being, that they were going to switch.
It didn't look like an offer, did it?
It didn't look like an offer at all. And Max said he wasn't on the racing line. And I beg to differ, because the track's not that wide. And actually, look at the issues we had during qualifying. There weren't cars on the racing line, and yet they were still in the way. So actually, if Max...
Also, it's a straight.
Exactly.
So the racing line is less relevant in a straight because it's a straight.
But initially, I thought maybe Lewis was a little bit apprehensive because he thought something was happening ahead of Max, and they sit quite low down in the cockpit, and they might have not been able to see. And given that we've just had 2 virtual safety cars and 2 full safety cars and 2 red flags, it wouldn't have been that unusual for another flag to be thrown, and that's why they might be slowing down. But like you said, moving on to the 2.4 G worth of braking, when your championship rival is directly behind you, it's close enough behind you that actually if you apply that amount of brake pressure, you know he's going to hit you. And is it easier to change a tyre than it is to change a wing? I don't know. It was very strange, very bizarre. I instantly went back to Baku when Vettel and Lewis kind of bounced off each other in that bizarre set of circumstances. But this was even stranger. Like, this was just so strange. And how...
Well, also, it's worth mentioning that we don't know exactly what's going through their heads. But as I said before, they're both experienced, intelligent racing drivers. Verstappen, I'm not saying that he did this maliciously or intentionally, but it has to be factored in that if there was more damage there, and I think this is why Toto and everyone in the Mercedes garage were so angry, is because they thought that was it.
I thought that was it for Lewis.
Because if Lewis had more damage, and goodness knows how it didn't do more damage than it actually did, what that front wing and the front suspension is made of, that would have decided the championship. Because if Verstappen had carried on and stayed in that position, which it looked like that he would have done, he would have comfortably won the race, I think. That would have been it. That would have been Verstappen world champion. So imagine if that was what decided the championship.
I can't believe that front wing hung on.
That's Toto's reaction.
When I saw them have that incident, I thought, you know what? This is a very fast flowing, very tight, technical, street-style circuit, and you want your front wing to be in one piece. You don't want bits of the side pod or whatever it's called, the side board hanging off, because actually you want every bit of downforce you're expecting because of the nature of the circuit. And I thought, this is it. They're going to have to box for a new front wing. And they went down the start-finish straight. I thought, Lewis hasn't boxed. Maybe they're taking photos. Maybe they're trying to assess the damage. And then it was just so bizarre. Like, how that front wing stayed on, how Lewis managed to then set faster laps with a broken front wing. That hasn't been mentioned yet. And that in itself is incredible. I don't know how that happened.
Yeah.
Obviously running lower fuel towards the end of the race. But actually, on a set of hards with a broken wing, he set the fastest lap of the race. I think fair play to the guy. But what an odd set of circumstances. It really is bizarre, isn't it? Like, the worst thing, you think this championship battle can't get stranger. I mean, we ended up 2 cars on top of each other in Monza. I mean, in Silverstone, Max went into a wall at at 70G or whatever it was.
51G.
And now we've got Hamilton and Max coming together on a 2.4G impact. Like, what is going on in this championship? We haven't even mentioned, well, you alluded to it earlier, that DRS detection line was only 100 meters up the road. And maybe Max thought, I'm going to brake here. Lewis has done a go past. I'll pick up DRS, straight past him into turn 1. Job done. I've paid my dues. Back into the lead. And maybe Lewis was thinking even further ahead. Max is slowing down. He's slowing down because of the DRS zone. I'm not giving him that. I will quite happily trundle along behind him, pick up the DRS, and then I'll overtake him on the straight and lead through sector 1. Who knows? We're not racing drivers. We're certainly not in the head of Lewis and Max, but oh man, what a couple of laps they were. It was so bizarre. And like you said, throughout this whole thing, it was only after the incident happened that we started hearing this radio feedback come through on the TV. We had the FIA with Red Bull and the FIA with Mercedes, and everyone was getting quite high rate. It was drama. It was drama indeed. It wasn't racing. It was terrible racing, and it was not good for the sport. But it was drama.
Yeah, it did come across in quite a farcical fashion. And I think both of them are got to be gaming it to some degree. I think they're just both too smart and experienced not to come out of this thick as thieves and be like, well, I don't know what was going on. I just saw him stop. Like, do you think Hamilton has to shoulder any blame for this particular incident, or is it more in Verstappen and the steward's territory?
I think it's
or Michael Massey, FIA, etc.
I think I was on a bit of percentage on it. I'd say it's probably 30% Lewis, 70% Max, because Max did brake quite sharply at the end, and Lewis did drive into the back of Max Verstappen when he could have quite easily gone round to the left-hand side. Even though it is a tight circuit, but there was space there, like you mentioned.
Well, the assumption is that he hit him because Verstappen put the brakes on.
Yeah, but why didn't he just drive past? And I know we talked about that. He might have thought there was a virtual safety car, or they were slowing down due to a hazard, or he wasn't quite sure whether they were.
The question remains
gaming.
Why he didn't simply just see a slow car in front of him and was like, "Oh, he's got a problem. Off we go."
Yeah, exactly.
That question still remains, but
whether they were gaming the DRS, who knows? Yeah. Who knows? Which is why I don't think Hamilton's completely
just confused
at all.
I guess,
but I'm confused. And we're 24 hours after the race, and Max has obviously got a 10-second penalty, and
that's what he got a penalty for, was pressing the brake in that scenario, which is the strangest aspect of it for me. That is the strangest and most unexplained bit. Why would you put the brakes on there? If you wanted to signal someone to go through, there's much safer and better ways to do that.
Absolutely. And just going back to Baku with Lewis and Vettel, and Vettel got a 10-second stop and go for banging tyres with Lewis Hamilton, and that didn't cause any damage to the car. Unfortunately, during that race, Lewis's head restraint hands device came loose, so actually Vettel's 10-second stop and go was kind of mitigated by Lewis having to box and get his hands device fixed. But Max,
it was like the bit around the edge,
it was just the
I forgot what it's called now, but it's just like
everyone
like
knows what we're talking
basically.
about. Yeah, it just
the headrest bit came loose.
It gets slots in after they jump in the car, don't they? It goes over the head and almost keeps them in. It's the bit they remove when they get out of the car by themselves. But for having a 10-second penalty for actually braking, causing a collision, and damaging another car, when actually a couple of years ago someone got a 10-second stop and go, makes me wonder whether the FIA or the stewards who were investigating this was very much like, actually, they're equal on points. This is going to be incredible for the final. Let's not give him a 10-second stop and go, because actually that might drop him into third or fourth place. And on top of his 5-second penalty anyway, for going off the track and gaining a last-in advantage, that would put the championship into Lewis's hands. And, it wouldn't be as much of a fight going into the final race if Lewis had, say, a 10-point lead or a 12-point lead.
That's the big conspiracy, isn't it? Are they orchestrating it to have this ultimate showdown? This imagine if they went into the final round on equal points, and now they really are doing it.
Yeah.
So it is a conspiracy theory. There's not a lot much in way of evidence, but it is.
No, of course not.
It contributes to the bizarreness of the situation. And
in one hand, I think the penalties aren't consistent with what Vettel and Lewis had a couple of years ago. In the other hand, I'm like, actually, has there been much consistency this year with regards to penalties and the FIA dishing them out? No. So it doesn't surprise me that, we've got this penalty and the standings have been unchanged and we're going into the final race equal on points. It's going to be great for the sport, but this shouldn't happen. At the end of the day, whatever happened on lap, was it 37? Was shocking.
Well, I don't know.
And it shouldn't happen.
Yeah, lap 38 was the contact, but I don't know if it is good for the sport. It's good for the spectacle. It's good for the entertainment aspect and for people talking about it, but it's just if this was the first race that you saw as a Formula,
you wouldn't come back, would you?
Formula One fan, you would have been absolutely baffled. Yeah. Just like, what is even going on? Nobody seems to have a handle on this situation. Yeah. At least in other sports, if the referee makes a decision or umpire makes a decision and it's controversial, somebody has made a decision and it's clear what has happened and who's unhappy about it. Whereas here, you're just, what's even going on? Nobody has a handle on this situation.
I tell you what,
it was a complete.
I tell you
mess.
what, I am glad about though, is there has been all the post-race stuff is done now. We're not there's as far as I'm aware. I mean, we haven't been on Twitter because we've been recording this podcast for about an hour now. But as far as I'm aware, no one has lodged a complaint. No one has lodged an appeal. And actually, this race result is standing, and we're not going to find out whether the race result stands in half a week's time, etc. Because I'm glad everything got wrapped up at least on the day. Because
I think Helmut Marko had a little bit of bluster to give.
He
didn't actually officially appeal anything, but
no,
that guy always got something to say.
Yeah, indeed.
But I think, is that telling as well that no appeals or anything have been pushed in? Does that show that people kind of know, particularly Red Bull, know that something was a little bit off there?
Would you appeal if you know you've got away with the situation pretty lightly? Probably not.
When you consider other scenarios where he could have got it off pretty difficult, because also we don't know, as we mentioned earlier, we don't know what would have happened if that scenario from the start where Michael Massey was like, this is what I'm going to offer you, whatever, because otherwise it would have been put through to the stewards and who knows what they would have done. So they might have done nothing. They might have just said, racing incident.
First lap of the second race.
You're allowed to just go off the track and lead the race through absolute nonsense.
It was bizarre. But like you alluded to earlier, none of us would want to be in that steward's office. None of us would want to be Michael Massey, and he's made the decisions he has. And actually, we had an entertaining race, nevertheless. That we did.
It's an unenviable job, isn't it?
Goodness, honestly, it's just crazy.
I've got one more talking point.
As if I.
You go. You're next, so you do yours.
I want to talk about the final lap and how Lewis across the line. Max across the line sometime afterwards. Obviously, he had not issues with his tyres, but he was just bringing them home because there was really no point in fighting with that penalty hanging over him.
I feel like he might have had some kind of damage or some kind of cut on
Red Bull have said
something.
He
was going weirdly slowly, wasn't he?
Red Bull have turned around and said that there was suspected damage to his tyres and they were just bringing it home. I don't think they want to give Mercedes the satisfaction or the gratitude knowing that actually towards the end of the race, Red Bull had made a dodgy call and Hamilton would have got him anyway. I think that was them potentially just saving face. I'm going to upset a lot of people on this podcast. I do apologise in advance. But I'm talking about the final lap and obviously the two
Here come the angry Dutch people in the comments. They're coming for us again. They're going to tell us how polite we are.
I know. Oh, blimey. Unbelievable. So the two championship rivals have crossed the finish line and we've got an onboard of Lewis and we've got an onboard of Max and we've got the drive of the day being announced and obviously Max talking to whoever and Lewis talking to his engineer. And yet we've got Bottas and Ocon having this absolute ding-dong battle going through Sector 3 side by side into the final corner and then have this great drag race down to the start-finish line. And what do we catch of it, Alex? What do we catch of it? We see it after they finish the race. We see them coming to a stop into turn 1 or slowing down into turn 1. Bottas pipped Ocon by a tenth. It was a photo finish. And yet the TV director was more concerned about...
Oh, no, it wasn't a photo finish because we didn't see it.
But the TV director was more concerned about showing Lewis Hamilton's helmet when he was driving or Max Verstappen's helmet. And yet we only just snapped towards the start-finish line as after they crossed it and they come to a halt. Why did we miss arguably one of the most exciting bits of racing this week?
Well, I'm glad that you've said this because my whole other talking point was about the broadcasting. Okay. So we can put these two together. Yeah, you're absolutely right that it's ridiculous that we missed this. You have a drag race for the line going on. That's got to be the priority. The priority needs to be on-track battles, wherever they are on track. There's no need for us to just be watching cars go round. Maybe there is some kind of contractual obligation that they have to show the winner crossing the line because the sponsors want to see, look, the sponsor, they're winning, they're the winning sponsor or something. Maybe it's some nonsense like that because they always have big screens. I mean, you've got to see the winner cross the line, I suppose, but it was the fact that they had that and they didn't move on to go, right, now there's another battle going on here. They just kind of followed that and it wasn't the only incident of this taking place. I've got quite a few notes here. Early on in the race, lap 4, we've got overtakes happening. Russell is moving on, made a move on Stroll. Sainz was pushing forward and getting past Tsunoda. But we were just watching Perez and Leclerc go round, even though they weren't really that close to each other. There wasn't any chance of a move being made. There are overtakes happening on track. Can we see the action? Can we see the battling? Yep. Like, we didn't get that. We missed the battle for the line for Bottas and Ocon. One of the best overtakes of the whole race was Giovinazzi overtaking Alonso.
On the outside.
We didn't get... Yeah, that was a great
fantastic.
We didn't get to see that. we didn't get to watch that. And I have got a couple of others that I've noted down here, but there was a few times where there were battles going on track. I can't find it at the moment, but there was another one. There were battles going on track, and yeah, we're just watching other cars just go around. The priority surely has to be on-track battles, and anybody who's looking at that timing line can see where people are close to each other and where battles are happening, and we're not getting it still. It's very, very frustrating. It's like somebody has fallen asleep whilst doing the broadcast. Like, there's a race going on. Let's see if anybody's fighting over here. Oh, somebody's done an overtake. Okay, let's show a replay of that. So yeah, we missed all that. We're there going, show us the battle. There's something going on here. Very frustrating. And to miss a drag race to the line is unforgivable for me. That's ridiculous. It was so obvious that was happening. You could see it on the timing. And now let's just watch Hamilton trundle over the line a little bit longer. And, drag race for the line. Oh, yeah, we'll show a replay.
That'll satisfy the crowd. You know what else? We missed the Ferrari battle. The two Ferraris were battling for a good couple of laps on that race. And
Sainz was unhappy as well. That was the other one we missed.
We saw a glimpse of it once it happened, or they were being pushed. I think Sainz was pushed off track by Leclerc, and they were fighting hard. And we've not seen the Ferraris fight hard this year, really. They've kind of just been separate on track, usually, ahead or around the McLarens if there's anyone in between them. And you could see the timing tower. It was like a tenth, half a tenth, 2 tenths, a tenth, half a tenth, 3 tenths, 1 tenth, half a tenth. I was like, oh, they're fighting. They're right next to each other. And then the names are switching up and down, up and down. I'm like, hold on, there is clearly a massive fight going on here. And yet, we're watching Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen, but there's a good 1.5 seconds difference between them. Let's quickly get a picture-in-picture of Lewis and Max in the top left-hand corner because nothing's happening with them at the moment, and get Charles and Sainz on the big screen. And if anything does happen, just switch them around. Honestly, I just miss so much in this race. I mean, we missed so much racing in this race. It was so much more on the drama and on the storytelling when actually the racing was missed.
Yeah, that's got to be the priority, and I think it also shows that there was some good racing going on, but we just didn't get to see it, which is pretty frustrating. So yeah, I think both of us thinking along the same lines for our final talking point there, how irritating it was for some of the broadcasting. I hope that they sort of dial that in a little bit more. I do understand some of the decisions that they're making that maybe I'm not personally in love with, but the priority's got to be on track battles. There's no excuse for missing that stuff when they have all the angles and cameras and everything that they have. There's just no excuse.
Right, let's move on to View from the Stands, where you guys can get in touch with us and send us your thoughts and opinions and questions on the race or on Formula One in general, and we will get back to you on the latest podcast. Now, to start things off, we have our very own RPM legend, Dave Doherty, who's gone straight to the highest point. He wants his crystal ball, and he wants me and Alex to answer it. Do you think Lewis can win at Abu Dhabi? Go on, Alex. What do you think?
Is he going to seal it? Because it is winner takes all now in that final thing. It is winner takes all.
What's your thoughts on that?
The last time we were at Abu Dhabi, Verstappen won, didn't he? That was the end of last season. It was a decisive victory. So Hamilton has a pretty good record here, but it's, Verstappen has got to win here too. So there's no obvious advantage going into this circuit, I don't think, especially with it being reprofiled, because that changes the nature of the potential racing as well. So can Lewis win it? Obviously the answer is yes, but the spectre hanging over it now is because of Brazil and because of this race in Jeddah. There's now this, they just have to come together and it's all over. And I don't want Verstappen to do that. And I think if somebody instigates it, it's probably going to be Verstappen. Let's face it, that's more his style. But I don't want him to do it. I want him to, if he wins fair and square by being just faster, brilliant, fantastic.
Then so be it. Yeah, fantastic stuff.
The best man won. I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
But if it's going to be something like that, it's going to be hilarious at first, and then it will be a bit embarrassing.
It'll be sad. it would be so sad because
and a bit of a shame.
Yeah, we've had this fantastic title fight for 22 races now. I think Abu Dhabi is the 23rd race this year, or maybe the 22nd. I've lost count. There's been so many. It's really hard to say actually, because coming out of Brazil, we had all this talk about this spicy engine and how Lewis managed to go from the back of the grid all the way through to P10 and then P10 to P1. And actually, they put the spicy engine in for this race, and didn't perform anywhere near as I thought it was going to. Max Verstappen would have probably got pole if he had hooked that final corner up correctly by some margin. So actually, I don't know who's going to win in Dubai, and I'm excited for that. Like you said, Alex, I hope that both of them, it's a team game, but I hope none of them have mechanical failures because I want to see them fight on track. I want to see someone win this race and then someone come in second and unfortunately not win the race. And but I don't want them to come together. I want it to be a clean fight for the win. May the best man win. And I'm getting to the point in the championship now where, yes, I'm British and I'm a Lewis Hamilton fan, but actually I couldn't care less who wins this championship because both drivers have driven really well this year and not so well this year. They've both made mistakes, but they're tied on points for a reason. We're going into the final race and it is the best man win. So I want to see the best man win. I don't want to see the best man take out this title rival and then win the race and secure the points. Let's keep it on track. Let's keep it clean. It's exciting times. We'll find out in 6 days' time. I can't wait. I can't wait to be doing this podcast in 7 days' time with you, Alex. It's going to be amazing. But thank you very much, Dave, for getting in contact. We shall answer your question next week with regards to who do you think can win at Abu Dhabi. Thank you very much.
Bringing it back to the race we've just had, we've got a question from another regular contributor at Daniel Fergie25. Thanks, Daniel, again. And he asks, what are your thoughts on Sebastian Vettel's retirement? Did you expect this to happen or did you expect him to finish in the points? What a race, by the way. We kind of touched on Sebastian Vettel. I think you thought that he probably should have retired or maybe done something a little bit earlier. Did we expect him to finish in the points? Well, he started. Vettel started in P17. It wasn't a good qualifying for either Aston Martins. They both were very poor. And Vettel was creeping his way up, wasn't he? I'm not sure exactly what position he was in at the time of the hit, but I feel like he was getting close to the points. It felt like he was one of those drivers who, because he was one of the drivers who didn't pit under the safety car. Yeah, that's right.
He would have been
for
quite
new
far
tyres on the red flag, so he definitely had got advantage from that. I think he was probably on it for points and was in a good position to recover. Stroll also managed to get pretty close. I think he ended up P11 in the end. Yes, he did. So it was on for him to potentially do okay and maybe squeeze a point out of it, but it didn't quite happen. What did you make of Vettel's retirement? Do you think it came a bit later than it should have done? Or?
I do think it was a little bit late. A day late and $1 short, some might say. I just thought with the amount of debris falling off his car, obviously you have no way to know if you've hit your car whether things are going to continue falling off. But actually, they continue to fall off over a fair few laps and then cause the VSC. So I think at that point, you're like, actually, this is getting a bit dangerous now. I'm not driving dangerously, but it's not safe to drive anymore because this car is falling to bits. And I think he should have retired quite some time earlier. Did I expect him to score points? It would have been a nice way to finish off the season or to head towards that direction. Like you said, both Aston Martins had a terrible qualifying session actually, and lucked out by the red flag and being able to change their tyres. So who knows what could have happened. If he kept it clean, he could have scored in the maybe 6th or 7th place. And I think he has done. I think in Monaco he scored 6th or 7th. I think that was one of his big first point hauls this year.
I think it was P5.
P5. So he could have done the same. Obviously, he's done a lot better this year. But yeah, if he had played the strategy right, he could have scored a handful of points. But unfortunately, just got tangled up.
It wasn't his fault at all with Tsunoda.
No,
Tsunoda
absolutely
just
not. No.
Was really clumsy.
It was such a rookie mistake. It was not good. And probably best that we don't talk about it, to be honest.
Well, so that wasn't Tsunoda's only thing as well, because he put it in the wall at one point too, didn't he? And made a complete pig's ear of trying to keep the car going as well.
Yeah. Unbelievable.
It's a shame, really, because he had quite a good start, but never mind.
Yeah.
But thanks, Daniel, for your question. And yes, what a race it was. It feels like the word race needs a massive asterisk next to it for this particular event. But yeah, it was a thing. It was a thing that was very exciting and entertaining and bizarre.
It needs 2 asterisks behind it, because the first asterisk after the race goes to Belgium.
Is the other one Obelix?
Yeah, well, the first, Belgium wasn't a race and this was not a race.
That was stupid. Carry on.
It is what it is. But thank you very much, Daniel, for getting in contact. Next question is from Chris Davies, 55. Thank you very much for getting in contact, Chris. Again, do you agree with the penalties applied, or do you think the FIA/stewards are more interested in a show-stopped final round? Where do you place the blame for the crash? Now, Chris has let us know that he's a Max Verstappen fan here. Thank you for letting us know. It's always good to get fans on board, whether you're a Lewis fan or not. So where do you place the blame of the crash? Is it with the FIA? Is it with Max? Or is it with Mercedes? Now, we've obviously talked about this in great detail, but Alex, to summarize, where does the blame lie? The majority of the blame lie?
The initial confusion that leads into it, I think that the FIA stewards, etc., have got to take some share of the blame because of the order in which they pointed out what was going to happen. And you mentioned, it makes a lot more sense to tell the chasing car first, because then they know what's going to happen. So they definitely deserve some of the stick for that. But Max has, for the way that he approached it, has got to take the lion's share of the blame, because it was just unnecessarily obstructive. Firstly, he's supposed to be letting him by, but he's still in the middle of the track. And then just the pressing of the brakes, I just don't understand it. Why would you do that other than to try and deliberately cause some kind of issue, or to do something that at the very least maybe wasn't deliberately trying to damage Hamilton or anything like that, but at the very least was rash, was unnecessarily risky. Again, if you want to make it clearer to Hamilton that you're letting him by, just move over to the right, or slow down a little bit even more so that Hamilton gets the idea and goes past him. But to press on the brakes in that manner, that's unnecessarily risky. So that's why he got the penalty for that, is that he has to take the lion's share there. So a bit of the FIA for causing the confusion, and they've caused plenty of confusion throughout the whole race. But it's mostly Max on this one.
Do you think the penalty was justified, or do you think it got away lightly with it?
I've seen much softer incidents get much harder penalties. So if historical precedent is anything to go by, I think that they gave him a pretty soft penalty so they'd keep him in P2. I mean, I do think that the results are starting to affect the way that they're doing it. It seems too much of a coincidence, doesn't it? When you consider the historical precedent. What was it, Vettel, for what Vettel did, which was a much slower speed, and maybe it was a bit more obviously deliberate though with Vettel. I guess that's the thing with Vettel. It was absolutely deliberate, wasn't it, what he did? So I don't know. I still think he's got away pretty lightly. I think he could have got a much harsher penalty for that in that situation.
So the first part of this question is, do you agree with the penalties applied, or do you think the FIA or stewards are more interested in a show-stopped final round? Because what we have right now is two drivers on equal points going into the final round, even with that penalty applied.
Yeah, I can't help but feel that it's maybe starting to affect it.
Isn't it?
It starts to feel like a bit too much of a coincidence, and I don't like to be conspiratorial about it, and I can't prove it, but it's I think they've given him a penalty, but they've also been careful about it.
They've not really given him a penalty.
They've been very careful about it.
Yeah. And as for me, I agree with you. The FIA caused the initial confusion. They should definitely let the chasing car know what's happening first instead of the leading car. Without a doubt, that was definitely a bit of a slip up on their behalf, and I'm sure they'll be looking into that in future, because it's something that they can fix and learn from straight away. I'm surprised this hasn't happened before, if that's the case. But obviously Max was waiting for that perfect part of the track to slow down and actually, not move out of the way, but just slow down on. But yes, that 2.4G brake pedal kind of, it puts it in Max's court. It puts the blame fully in Max's court. I don't know why Lewis didn't drive round. That will never be, we'll never know that. We'll never know what was going through his head, whether he thought something was happening, whether he was playing the DRS game, or whether he just didn't have a clue what was going on and thought, you know what, I don't know what to do. But the 2.4G slowdown, which caused the incident, that's all Max. And I think the penalty was light, but also the penalty doesn't really do anything for it doesn't do anything for the championship whatsoever. I never expected it to do anything to the championship, because why would you ruin this perfect title?
It does potentially impact the next championship.
Well, with the amount of penalty
points.
He's
got 2 penalty points.
Yeah.
For it. He'll have quite a few points for quite a few races.
Yeah, true.
Because obviously it takes a while for them to disappear.
12 months,
so it might impact. Yeah, it takes a while. So it might impact the next championship, but in context, it feels a little It feels a little gentle.
It does. And
I mean, it's not really strictly a penalty.
It's more of a
penalty
warning.
Doesn't actually impact anything. Yeah, it operates more like a warning, doesn't it, in a way? But the penalty points are there. It still feels surprisingly lenient compared to we talked before about Hamilton having the same thing as Verstappen, and he got a 25-second penalty for something that got Verstappen a 5-second penalty here. So, and there's quite a few years apart, but to my knowledge, the rules haven't exactly changed in regards to that. So, it's just the sort of vague tone of the stewarding.
It's certainly interesting, isn't it?
That's the weirdness of it.
But thank you very much, Chris, for getting in contact. Once again, your questions always cause a conversation starter or cause us to continue a conversation what we've had throughout the podcast. So appreciate them. Keep them coming in. And if any one of you listeners want to get in contact, we've got a couple of podcasts left this year. We're not just going to stop at the end of Abu Dhabi. We've got a season review. I'm sure we'll go through the teams and drivers and talk about our highlights and also our weird and wonderful predictions from the start of the year. I'm sure we'll have to recap on those as well. So there's plenty more time for you guys to tweet your questions in. You can email us at info@raceperminute.com, or you can go to raceperminute.com/contact and drop us or fill out the form and submit your question there. And we shall get to them in the next podcast.
Now let's move on to driver of the day and championship standings.
Oh dear.
Because there's quite some serious things to talk about here. Start with driver of the day. Now, first off, the official driver of the day was Max Verstappen. He took that popular vote. What did you make of this, Shane?
I think it's a shambles. I really do. It's such a popularity competition. There were so many drivers who did a great job at this track. And I'll mention my driver of the day soon. But how Max Verstappen secured driver of the day, I think the percentage goes to show that it was just like a fan vote. It wasn't an overwhelmingly 75% like vote. It was a 25% scrape through as driver of the day. It just wasn't justified. How can you give someone driver of the day and they've got a 5-second penalty and after the race they got a 10-second penalty? That's barbaric. Like, I just don't understand. It just blows my mind.
Yeah, it's just people.
That's what I think about driver of the day.
They're just voting for their driver, basically. This is our driver. And Verstappen also a little bit disappointingly used it as an opportunity for some populism.
Oh, I know.
He? Yeah, I mean, he was obviously feeling pretty hard done by at the end of the race. So, and what he said whilst he was in the car, I don't really hold it too strong against him, but it was just this sort of slightly disappointing populism, really. Like, the fans know what real racing is. Oh. If only such consensus existed amongst F1 fans. Like, boy, you have no idea. I don't think there's any agreement amongst the fans what constitutes real racing, but there we go.
Oh, goodness, yeah.
We don't even know how many votes are cast. We know nothing about these votes, really, so they don't signify anything. But, that was Verstappen's feeling. He was appealing to his base, if I might use a political term.
Yeah.
So it was a bit disappointing that he did that. I think as a vote, it's just emblematic of the sort of usual popularity contest that we've seen. Let's get down to our personal drivers of the day then. So it was a good race for Ricciardo and Giovinazzi. There were some good performances going around, people climbing up the order. I think Sainz will be probably a bit disappointed to not get more, even though he started P15. He continues his point streak, so he did very well. Although he now has the record for most points without a win.
Oh, really?
Does Carlos Sainz? Yeah, he is now the driver with the most points without ever having had a win.
He is now the Nico Hulkenberg.
He
never got a podium, did he?
Sainz has been on the podium a couple of times, so he's not that he's not quite that
that unlucky.
I was going to say pitiable. That sounds a bit mean. But
unlucky, yeah.
But yeah, so he's not that unfortunate. / hasn't thrown away his opportunities quite the same way. But otherwise continues his point streak, which is good news. There's good news and bad news for Sainz. As for actual driver of the day, though, getting down to it, I think it's got to be Ocon for me. Even if he wasn't quite able to hold on to the podium position in the end. He started P9 and had a really solid start, was up a handful of positions, found himself P4 for the first restart.
Led 100 metres.
As Summer headed obviously bonks. Yeah, he led very, very briefly and showed some commitment by trying to throw it in anyway. So that was fun. Then he was Yeah, he was leading the second restart and did well to hold on to P3 as long as he did, really, given that he had, it was Ricciardo and Bottas behind him, wasn't it? So he did very well to hold on to it for as long as he did. And all of this whilst his two-time world champion teammate was having issues and struggling for pace. And so I think Ocon really, really did very well. It was unfortunate not to get the podium, but yeah, he's my driver of the day. I think that's a great performance for him. And if that Alpine keeps the development up on that car and it starts producing better and better results, he could be capable of more potential podium positions like that.
Yeah, it's not a bad shout actually. And my driver of the day is somewhat very similar in the fact that my driver of the day started 11th and then finished 5th, and that's Daniel Ricciardo.
Danny boy.
Yes, and from the ashes, the phoenix rises, because actually McLaren have had an abysmal 4 or 5 weeks, let's be honest. And I'm not saying this week's been fantastic by any means, but actually it's been a great race for Daniel Ricciardo, keeping it clean, some great overtakes, opportunistic on the strategy, and just finished P5 when others around him were going backwards. I hate to say that, Norris, where did Norris finish? Let's have a look. Let's directly compare him to his teammates. So Norris finished in P10 and got 1 point, but actually qualified higher than Ricciardo and qualified P7. So his teammate went from P7 to P10 in the same car where Ricciardo went from P11 to P5. Now I know Norris in box got messed up with the red flag, and obviously wasn't very opportunistic with the tyres.
He did box.
He did box, and then obviously he got the red flag, so he lost out there. But actually, great job from Ricciardo, like I said, from the midfield to keep it clean, especially in this racetrack as well, where so many drivers picked up damage. It didn't force him to tyre, but a lot of drivers actually finished with a little bit of damage here and there. Ocon had a bit of damage because him and Hamilton hit into turn 1. So, he did a great job.
He had a good move on Gasly as well.
He really did, yeah. So I think actually Ocon and Ricciardo, very similar races. And Ocon, I completely agree, it is well up there and just shy of that podium. It would have been great to see him on that podium again.
It would have been great to see the overtake.
It would have been great to see the overtake, which went down to the start-finish line. But, thank goodness we got a replay after we watched Lewis Hamilton's helmet for 30 seconds.
And also, other than Hamilton and Verstappen, I believe Ocon has the most laps led this season.
He does. He really does as well, which is not great for Bottas, is it? Let's be honest. Or Perez. Yeah, it's not good.
Yeah.
And that was all thanks to Hungary, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's mainly that, because he was in the lead for some time. Because Perez obviously won in Baku, didn't he?
Yeah, because of the blowout.
He had the lead for a short period of time.
Because Lewis went straight on at turn 1, and then Max Verstappen had a tyre failure after Stroll, and then Lewis went straight into turn 1 and just didn't make the corner. And then
his magic button.
His
not-so-magic button.
That was ages ago. That was so long ago, and here we are towards the end of the season. But there we have it. So your official driver of the day is Max Verstappen. Don't think any of us really agree with that. No disrespect to Max Verstappen fans, but actually Ocon did a fantastic job, and so did Ricciardo, if I don't mind saying so myself. But who is your driver of the day? Let us know in the comments below if you're watching on YouTube. And if you're listening on any audio platform, then you can get in touch with us at RacePerMinute on Twitter and just say, here's my driver of the day and here's my opinion. And we were like, okay, cool. Or we were like, are you crazy?
Let's talk about the championship standings then. That's the next step. And I think this time we will start with those driver standings. Shane, take us through the top 10.
Oh, here we are. The penultimate race. In P1, we have Max Verstappen with 369.5 points. And in P2, only in P2, due to winning one less race this year, we have Hamilton on exactly the same amount of points. Who would have guessed it after the amount of times we spoke about it in this podcast, where both drivers on 369.5 points. Bottas quite comfortably in P3 now with 218, with Perez comfortably in P4 with 190 points. Leclerc has taken P5 of Lando Norris. Now, we spoke last week about how McLaren have to be careful because Norris at one point was in P3 in this championship, and at worst, he could finish in P7. So at the moment, Leclerc's on 158 points and Norris is on 154. But the crucial thing is that Carlos Sainz is behind Norris with 149.5 points. And if Sainz outscores Norris by 1 or 2 positions, P6 in the championship could be the Ferrari guys and not and not Lando Norris. And that's a shame because Norris had such a strong start to the season. And actually, Norris has outshone his teammate a lot this season. But if all goes to plan for Ferrari, Norris will be in P7 and Ricciardo will be in P8. And that's not the championship they had early stages of this year. It's quite a shame. But just because the top two are tied on points and the championship will be decided doesn't mean that everything else is decided all the way down the grid either. So as I said, in P8 we have the Australian Daniel Ricciardo on 115, and then Pierre Gasly on 100 points in P9. And then Fernando Alonso rounding up the top 10 with 77 points.
I believe it's Gasly's first time he's got to 100 points.
Yes,
in Formula One. So
indeed,
it's not all bad news, but it does feel like it should be a lot more. Even though he did have a generally good result, I think he started P6 and finished P6, didn't he?
He's such a consistent driver. He is flourishing in that AlphaTauri where he couldn't do in that Red Bull.
It was another very underrated drive, wasn't it? It was just because he missed out from Ricciardo that he might have finished P5 instead. But yes, so that was, Alonso with 77 in P10. His teammate very close behind with 72. So there could be, there's still to play for between those two to prove who finishes ahead. But even if Alonso does much better in the final race, I think Ocon has done very well here. I think points-wise, results-wise, his teammate is one of the greatest of all time. Like, I don't think he's done too badly, all things considered, I think that he's really shown a good result here. And I've said a few times that I do really like Ocon and I rate him as a driver. I think he still shows a lot of potential. Let's move on to P12 then. Sebastian Vettel, P13, Lance Stroll. The two Aston Martins bringing them up 43 to 34 points. Not a huge gap between them. I don't know if they're likely to score any more. It keeps being a struggle for them. They keep having to take advantage of these situations to crawl them back, don't they? Oh, his teammate hits 100 points and Yuki Tsunoda is still on 20.
Yeah,
he
huge.
Really made a mess of it. He really made a mess of it in this one. He's still on 20 points. I think he's been on 20 points or close enough to 20 points for some time now. It's not a good look at all.
He hasn't scored points
the potential in
in
the car.
4 races.
Has he not?
No.
Okay. And when he does score points, it's usually not loads. So, but Russell P15, 16 points, and Raikkonen then with 10. Latifi with 7 and P17. Giovinazzi. Now Giovinazzi finished P9, didn't he? Yeah. So it was a good race for him, and he had what I thought was probably the overtake of the race as well. So he actually had a good result, but ultimately he still only got 3 points because and 2 of them he got today for this race. So it's just not quite come together for Giovinazzi. Obviously, we know he's not going to be there next season, so it's it's a slightly ignoble finish to the season for Giovinazzi unless Giovinazzi somehow wins the final race.
That would be a final race.
Like mad. I don't anticipate it happening, but who knows? And then the last 3, there's no change. It's Schumacher, Kubica, Mazepin. Mazepin obviously unlikely to drag back that position from Kubica, who, to be fair, did have a much better car in comparison. So I think he's going to be lucky to do anything other than 21st place. So Shane, let's start off with the constructor standings. Going with the top 5.
So at the top, and with a decent lead in the Constructor Championship now, is Mercedes with 587.5 points compared to Red Bull in second place with 559.5 points. Unfortunately, Perez being taken out of this race has hit the Constructors' Championship quite hard for Red Bull. That's not to say it's not all over yet, because anything can happen in this sport, and actually we've seen bigger deficits closed over one race. It would only take a double DNF for Mercedes, and that's horrible to think about going into the last race, but actually Red Bull could be singing and dancing in both championships still. It's not out of the question. It's not all done and dusted yet. It technically and mathematically still can happen.
If they had like a Bottas DNF and maybe like Red Bull second and third, would that give them enough points? What's the deficit?
The deficit is basically 28 points.
28 points.
So actually not too bad. Yeah, second and third would do it.
18 and 15, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that's enough. So if they got P2 and P3 and say Bottas DNF'd or something or didn't get enough points, that would be enough for them to get there, I think. So
there it is.
Still to play
technically possible. In P3, we have Ferrari with 307.5 points compared to McLaren in P4 with 269 points. It looks like McLaren is settling for P4 and Ferrari have done the job and they will settle for P3 in the championship. Much bigger.
It feels like way too much of a deficit.
Huge,
now,
It's about 50 points, so it's that's about 40 points actually, but it's too much really for those two teams. And then to top off the top 5, we have Alpine with 149 points.
So then chasing them is AlphaTauri, 120 points. So there's this 29-point gap. That also feels pretty unassailable in one race unless something pretty incredible happens. It's just, you've got to lay it at Tsunoda's door. I know Gasly hasn't been super consistent in places. He's had his own troubles, but generally speaking, he has produced results with more consistently than Tsunoda,
Yeah.
certainly. And Tsunoda, to have 20 points in that car just feels pretty lame. Aston Martin with 77. Williams still on 23. Alfa Romeo pick up a few extra thanks to Giovinazzi's result here, but that's another deficit that's just doesn't seem like it's going to change. These bottom 4 just are not going to change now, so it's short of something really, really surprising. So that we've been saying for quite a few races now that this sort of bottom half of the grid is pretty set.
Yeah,
it's just not going to change now. All the battles are in the top half.
Yeah, where it goes to show that actually the teams which probably don't have as much money as the top teams have stopped developing their car. And because you've stopped developing a car doesn't mean that your car stays the same with the rest of the grid. If the cars ahead of you are still developing car, you'll slowly lose time race after race after race. And like you said, actually, yes, there's only 13 points between Haas and Alfa Romeo, but they're such a long way off scoring anywhere near the top or even the midfield now. It's a real long shot. So actually, the Drivers' Championship is all up for grabs and loads of positions could change in the Drivers' Championship. But as for the Constructors, it's safe to say the majority of it is locked in apart from the top couple of teams there where, anything can happen.
And it's a shame as well to have a season end where a team has scored no points. It's always nice to see all the teams score at least one.
Yes,
point.
Absolutely.
So fingers crossed for Haas for next year. Maybe they'll rejuvenate and have much like their very first season where they came in and there were these sort of surprise giant killers.
Yeah.
It would be nice to see them do that again.
Schumacher said this week that he's looking forward to driving the 2022 car, and which is obviously a given because he's had, the 2021 car looks. I mean,
what he means
great.
is he can't wait to be out of this absolute tub that he's driving.
Yeah, the tractor which is going around the circuits we call racetracks. Haas don't think of them as racetracks.
Yeah, they're more just sort of like
Sunday drive schools or whatever.
Yeah, it's just like a sort of driving school.
It has been a year of development for their drivers, Haas. And hopefully next year, like you said, with the regulation changes and a little bit more time to develop the car and a lot of wind tunnel time for Haas, might be able to be a little bit more profitable and fruitful in the 2022 season.
They said it was a learning year, and what they've learned is
nothing.
They're slow.
They are very slow. Oh dear. Well, that's it for our post-race discussion. It was the penultimate race of the year, the Saudi Arabia Grand Prix. Race ***, because who knows? It was more drama than racing. It was definitely entertaining, and Netflix, there will definitely be an episode on this race. You can be sure, because it was just drama all over the place.
At least they got the demonym right this time. It was the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix.
Yes. Oh, I'm glad you commented on that. It was. It's only taken them 22 races to get that right. I'm glad that you're finally satisfied with that.
They'd randomly decided they would just do it properly this week. So.
Yeah. But that's it. Send us your thoughts or questions to us at RacePerMinute on Twitter, like I mentioned before. And you can get in contact at RacePerMinute.com. And if you're watching on YouTube, by all means, give us a thumbs up and comment below. We'll do our best to get back to you. I think we pretty much get back to every single comment on YouTube at the moment. If you've enjoyed this episode, please give us a rating or a like. And if you like what we do, please consider subscribing for more wherever you get RacePerMinute, whether that's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. Honestly, the like ratings, the hearts, the 5 stars, the subscriptions, all helps drive this algorithm, which we have no idea how it works. But actually, it just shows us that you like what we're doing, and we'll continue plodding along and creating this little podcast we have, which is called RacePerMinute. And if you really want to support the show and help keep the quality content coming and receive some lovely rewards, you can do by donating as little as £1 a month. The show is not free, and both Alex and I have invested in our equipment and editing software to make sure that this sounds and is as good as it possibly can do. And the biggest downfall is basically me behind the mic, but everything should sound as crystal clear as you want it to. So it doesn't come cheap, but we're happy to do it. So any donation would be much appreciated, how small or how big. Alex, we've done the majority of the races. We have one race left, 2 p.m. Sunday. Are you looking forward to it? Are you a little bit nervous? What's your thoughts? What's your opinions? Your final thoughts, please. I kind of just chucked this on you.
Yeah, there's a certain spectre hanging over it because of this going in on equal points. And are they just going to crash each other out? Because, that, as we've seen before with classic tangles with Senna Prost, for example, it could just be first corner.
Done,
could just
dusted.
be throw it in. Maybe
Max Verstappen world champion.
It's possible that they might, if that happens, he might get disqualified for it. They might say, look, you did it on purpose. It was absolutely deliberate. So you get disqualified. That could happen as well. Who knows? That's how much chaos it could cause. So I'm scared. A little bit nervous about that. I just want to see a good race to close off. And it's a little bit frustrating in a way because Abu Dhabi's, it's not been the best track for good racing historically, but they've reprofiled it. So maybe that'll be better. I'm willing to give it a chance for that. And also the number of times that we've come to this track and gone, well, the championship's pretty much over, so we're just going to see a battle for like P4 in the championship.
Best of the rest.
Which is always fun to see, but it's not quite the same as a climactic title battle. So at least we're getting to see that. Obviously not going to miss it for the world, so it's going to be very, very exciting. It's a proper little event in its own right. And I just reserve all thoughts until the actual Grand Prix weekend itself now. I tell you what I won't be doing, and that's I won't be going anywhere near social media because I think it's going to be absolutely horrific. It was horrific after this race. Race is only going to be even worse after Abu Dhabi. So
It really was. Luckily, the race.
Let's try and be calm and enjoy it for what it is, which is a sporting event.
Yeah,
it's not. There are people. The number of times I've seen people talking about matters as if it's a matter of justice and injustice. There are real, genuine, awful injustices going on in this world. Like, let's save that kind of language for the real issues in the world. I feel like this is something that we should be able to enjoy and appreciate as a sporting event and not get too carried away by. Let's do our best.
Let's do our best. This is the second time we've gone into a final race on equal points. And this is only the 30th time we've gone into the final race of the season for the championship battle. History awaits. I'm scared, I'm nervous, I'm excited. Like you said, I'm not going to miss it for the world. It's going to take me a while to just gather my thoughts and emotions afterwards because it's been such an up and down season. I really hope it ends on an up. And like you said, not a turn one incident. Can you imagine if there's an incident in turn one and actually they're going to, it just pops up. Incident between Max and Lewis will be investigated after the race. You're like, how? This is it. Sorry, I just hit my mic. This is it. This is the race. You got to investigate it now. Hopefully it doesn't come to that, but can you imagine?
It'll be noted.
It'll be...
We've noted it.
Turn one collision between Max and Lewis, noted. Great.
No further action.
Oh, goodness, can you imagine? Oh, blimey.
They're both disqualified from the championship and Bottas finally gets...
his last year of Mercedes and he gets a world championship. You know what? I'd be happy with that, honestly. The way this year's gone, I'm happy with whoever wins as long as it's fair and square on the last race and there's no dirty tactics. But that's it from us. 7 days' time, we'll find out. We'll be back here with the final podcast of the year. I'm smiling now. Finally, just so happy. We'll see you next week.
Yeah, can't wait for it. We'll see you there.
See you next week.